like work in the world is so unspoken about in many ways. And yet, maybe you could just put a little color on that right now about like, what is it that you perceive you're doing in the world?
Well, I think you said it really well in one sense, in that I hold a lot of hands.
Yeah.
Um, I make it safe enough for people to actually leap off the edge of the world that they know,
Hmm.
because I do believe that they will be caught, that there is a net, that the universe is ready for them to leap. And it's just a matter of finding that courage to leave so many things behind.
Hmm.
And in a sense, I started doing that quite early in my life. And it turned out really well for me. So
Yeah.
it's easy for me, not easy, but it's a matter of course for me to actually be able to support that in
Hmm.
other people's lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you look back at your life, what do you feel like has given you that capacity to trust so deeply?
That is a really good question. And it's a little hard to know for sure, because I came from a fairly rigid, conservative, lower middle class white family in the Midwest. And there weren't a lot of extras. I had four siblings, and um, a lot was expected of us as kids. We had chores, we had, anyway,
Mm.
and it wasn't a particularly soft, loving, nurturing environment. I
Mm.
mean, it isn't that they didn't love me, they did. They loved us all, but their ways of showing it were fairly limited.
Mhm.
And so early in life, I actually looked to the bigger world. And there was a wonderful woman who lived next door to us when I was in like second grade to sixth grade or eighth grade, Mrs. Warburton. And she lived all by herself, and she had cats, and I got to water her plants and feed her cats when she would go on trips. And she was just for me an example of another whole way to do it.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh, wow. And I could walk into her house and energetically feel, even as a kid, the difference, because it was peaceful there.
Oh.
My household was tense and little bit chaotic and rigid.
Mhm.
Hers was not, it was soft.
Oh, so that's when you first got a taste of that. Like,
Well, it's one of the really big influences that I know happened
mhm.
and that I really gravitated to.
Yeah.
And then when I was 11, I had the great good fortune to meet a woman named Helen, who is going to make me cry.
Mm.
Um, she ran a children's bookstore, and she was an incredibly well educated. I think she had her master's degree in literature, and books were her world.
Mm.
She had two sons and no daughters. So she adopted me.
Mhm.
And I went to work in her bookstore from the time I was 11 or 12 until I graduated from college.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And she handpicked what I read. She taught me how to run a business. She had me help cater her afternoon soirees with books and literature for women in the community.
Mm.
She introduced me to the headmaster of the first school that I taught in. She was really very influential. She taught me how to drink scotch way before I should have.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's
And so she was a really leveling, expansive
mm.
um, influence on my life.
Mm. It's
She taught,
incredible. Oh, go ahead.
yes, she taught me how to wrap presents. Presents were important to her, and
Oh.
in her in her bookshop, we wrapped gifts for birthdays and Christmas, and I learned how to do that with a flair, and I loved it.
Ooh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. It's sounds like she both opened you artistically and your imagination. And God, it seems like it was almost like it reminds me of Wizard of Oz when like the becomes this technicolor world, like a whole other reality that you stepped into.
It was, yes.
Yeah.
And she mentored me for enough years so that by the time I graduated from college, I really didn't need reparenting,
Mm.
even though I'd had many um, missing pieces in my own biological family. She filled in many of those gaps.
Mm.
And it just gave me the blueprint for, oh, this is what generosity looks like in the world. Because yes, she paid me a salary, but no, she took me under her wing
Right.
and she made sure I survived in a really whole way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like she wasn't just tending to Maslow's security of like financial, she was actually tending to your emotional, psychological development.
She really was. And the books she chose for me to read were often just so spot on that it was like, oh my goodness, she can read my mind.
Wow. Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so you're actually touching on a key point that I wanted to touch on today, which is this whole notion of reparenting. I mean, because that's essentially what I felt like you helped me with. And what I mean by the reparenting is I think this is universal, and we've talked about this before, where just as a human being, we are naturally going to have missing experiences early in life. And then we're going to create all these adaptations of how to
Hmm.
manage the missing experiences, and they become personality traits and all sorts of things. But I think there's something really powerful about I didn't find you until I was in my early 30s. And I needed reparenting in a way that I kept trying to do on my own and I kept trying to do with therapists, but without the help of you and you connecting with my body, I really couldn't get access to integrating those missing experiences and feeling that I could find ground inside of myself. And I wonder if you can speak a little bit because it sounds like Helen did that for you and then you started doing that for other people. Maybe you could talk a little bit
Yeah.
about that.
She did that for me experientially and intellectually. She did not necessarily do that for me in terms of my body experience. That happened much later in my life.
Okay.
Um, and I think it's extremely important that we have examples of what we want it to look like. She gave me, and Warburton gave me, other examples of how to be a woman in the world.
Mm.
That was way outside the experience in my family.